Hello and welcome back to Retro Ranger. At the time of filming, it's the first few days of May, and I'm fresh off of the Midwest Gaming Classic Show, which is an event held in Milwaukee, Wisconsin that focuses on two of my favorite things, pinball and, of course, retro video games. It has floors dedicated to each, in addition to other hobbies like board and card games, as well as things like D&D and more. Great people, good restaurants, and always a fun time to pick up retro games. While I didn't get everything I was hoping to find, I did come back with quite the haul, checking off more than a few things that I've been wanting to pick up. Here's just a look at some of the games that I grabbed this year at MGC. Starting with the PlayStation 1, I ended up snagging a few games on my list for the system, the first of which is Threads of Fate. This is one of those games that I must have owned at one point in the past, as my memory card still has a save file from it back in its day. It's a fun action RPG where you choose between two characters which share an interwoven story, hence the title. I chose Mint this time as it wasn't long before I crossed paths with Rue, the other possible option to play as from the beginning. They're both searching for the same thing, which is an ancient relic, though not unexpectedly, they each have their own motivation in doing so. Mint's rationale is to gain the relic to dominate the world and reclaim her status as a ruling leader of her royal family. While that can sound a bit generic, it plays out well, and the other characters you meet are all interesting too. The dialogue is engaging and it has a good amount of humor laced within it to keep the story entertaining as it moves along at a good pace. The combat consists of close-range melee attacks which can turn into a 3-hit combo and a mid-range magic attack. Combat is generally fast-paced and enjoyable once you learn how to goad enemies into attacking you first so that you can dodge and then circle back with a counter. At least that was my eventual strategy for the first two bosses I got thus far, and it seemed to be the most effective way of progressing. As I popped this in to capture some gameplay, I started to remember it a bit more than I thought I would have guessed, and it's a good thing. It's a good game, and I'm glad to have it back in my collection for sure. I'm looking forward to returning to this one later to finish it up this time around. Okay, next is a game called Brave Fencer Musashi. It's another action RPG, but one I've never played before, but it's been recommended to me a few times. Even when I was standing with it at the convention, debating if it was the right time to buy, someone saw it and recommended it right there on the spot. You play as Musashi, who is summoned to a different world by a princess in need, only they're not really sure by what they got and aren't at all excited by what they see. As you can hear, the game has a ton of voice work, and it definitely adds to the enjoyment of the title. Combat between this and Threads of Fate are actually pretty similar and have mostly the same behavior. One unique aspect of Brave Fencer Musashi is assimilation. You can assimilate enemies and gain their power. Who does Musashi think he is, the Borg? While this is sometimes helpful or even required for some of the puzzles, I found it difficult to pull off, as you need to stand in front of their attack and do this special absorbing block thing, and if you're not lined up perfectly, you're going to fail and that attack will hit you. And this happened a few times, so I just started to feel that it may not be worth the risk. Attacks too felt a little lackluster to me sometimes. I would just fail to hit the target even if I was right in front of it. I found myself having to do a little shimmy to get it to just trigger the hit. There's something a bit off here with the combat that I'm sure that with some time you could probably overcome. Thankfully, the dialogue, the story, and the puzzles will all keep you satisfied until you feel one with the combat flow. Okay, sticking with the original PlayStation, this is Vanguard Bandits, and if you saw my video with Working Designs games, you know that this one is definitely a publisher I seek out. Vanguard Bandits is a strategy or tactical JRPG that follows the usual formula of non-controllable story scenes broken up by fights or missions in which you're locked to a grid to complete the mission's goals, typically just defeating all the enemies on the screen. This game is no slouch either when it comes to those missions, which the game manual boasts that there's over 60 of them that can play out, earning one of 5 potential unique endings. In terms of gameplay, this might present a ton of value as a result. The main premise that's unique here is that you control these mechs, which the game refers to as ATACs, or all-terrain armored combatants, and they're just the catalyst for battling, but they're also referenced in the story quite a bit too. The battle scenes remind me a lot of the Fire Emblem or the Shining Force games, as here too you get cuts to the individual ATAC battle sequences that play out, which take the context of the engagement into consideration. After each of these battles you'll gain experience and money used for the typical RPG things, though it's worth noting that unlike the other 2 earlier franchises I mentioned, you actually get to allocate your own stat points when you level up with this game. Another interesting battle mechanic is that you can choose how you want to respond to an incoming attack, and I couldn't seem to recall seeing this in a different game to compare it with. You'll get the options of things like defending, avoiding, countering, and more, and while these aren't necessarily guaranteed, of course, they will give you quite the advantage when successful. This is really interesting, and it keeps you engaged when you're getting attacked and it's not your turn, and that's a good thing as a whole because the pace of the combat is generally a bit slow. That said, you'll be sticking around as the story is interesting, and even in the beginning it just really does a good job of ramping up. The characters all feel unique with their dialogue, and you can tell it flows great like most Working Designs translations often do. Strategy RPGs are one of my favorite genres of games, and so I'm likely biased here, but despite the slower combat pace, I really enjoyed this and really just glad to have it in my collection. I'll be returning to this one shortly as well, as I'm keenly interested in seeing it through to the end. Okay, switching platforms to the Dreamcast, here's Prince of Persia Arabian Nights. Yikes, this game is a big miss for me, as it's just a lesson in patience for sure. Chances are you've played a Prince of Persia game before, but you'll usually associate it with great graphics, smooth and fluid movement, and fun action-packed gameplay. And I'm sad to report you're going to find little of any of that with this one. The graphics are just the middle of the road for the Dreamcast, and certainly not what it was capable of, and the environments are largely barren with a lot of maze-like stage design. The controls are surprisingly bad. It has the Dreamcast Y button being the jump, and the A button being the grab, each opposite of one another, and since you need to hold the Y for a bigger jump, your thumb is constantly doing this awkward stretch to cover both buttons. Jump with the A button and grab with the X button would have been such a better choice here, but perhaps not make the grab a requirement at all. Lining up these jumps are painful too, as it's hard to get perspective with the camera if you're just too far from the ledge or you're about to bonk your head from underneath. I will say though that when you do pull off some of these jumps and grabs, without having to attempt it at least multiple times, it does feel satisfying, so perhaps with some extended time with the controls, this game could have really come together. Perhaps the most frustrating part though is the instant kills that are everywhere. Spikes, of course, which just train you early on to jump over these to avoid the few minutes of time loss each time that you make a tiny mistake. But then later on, a very similar warning with this sword in the wall, which you'd need to then crawl under. Oftentimes you'll see an enemy open a door with a wall switch, only to have it instantly kill you when you attempt the same thing. No warning there either. Sometimes you just can walk into a room and try to pick up some innocent looking item and get blasted from the wall, again instantly killing you, one hit only. To say this game is not fun would be a bit of an understatement. I can understand the fun of a good challenge, but the combination of just the clunky controls, the instant kills everywhere, it just really puts this squarely in the one time is enough pile for me. It's been missing from my collection for a while, and so on one hand, I'm happy to finally get it and move on, but it's a shame it's just not as good as some of the others in the series are. Let's move on. Moving on from the Dreamcast, I was super excited to pick up a really nice copy of Lunacy for the Sega Saturn. It's one that I've been hunting for a long time, but after getting a smoking deal, I just couldn't pass it up this year. This is a strange experience of a game that carries a strong undertone of uneasiness throughout it, and it just piles on the mystery from the get-go. It really brings forth almost like a Twin Peaks vibe. You play as Fred the Traveler.
Hey, who are you?
I'm a traveler. Call me Fred.
I'm Hannah. The inn is closed. Good luck, traveler.
You start to unfold this mystery slowly by exploring the town and solving puzzles. While you don't have a cursor, it does essentially play like a point-and-click kind of game. You pan the camera to the available angles, and then you choose to move in that direction or to investigate a particular area. The town is unnervingly empty, and the townsfolk that are present are standoffish and creepy, which adds to the overall feeling of just a really strange mystery.
What do you want? If you've come empty-handed, there's the door.
Fred is suffering from amnesia and is attempting to uncover his past, of course, only he's not going to get much help here. They'll just be awkwardly watching Fred and give him really cryptic messages that just adds to the overall mystery. The puzzles are engaging, and you'll soon find yourself collecting more keys than a janitor to start unlocking the town and its mysteries, of which there's no shortage. The controls are simple, and despite there being relatively little in terms of action in the gameplay, it's addictingly fun, and you'll just want to know what happens next. The graphics are really impressive for this early generation of 3D modeling, and it reminds me of an improvement to, let's say, Panzer Dragoon Saga's style. Everything is voice acted and it's really well done, which just adds to the overall menacing atmosphere. Overall, I had way more fun with this game than I expected. It's unfortunately pretty short, clocking in at about 4 hours, but would make a great single playthrough. If only it wasn't so rare these days. Anyways, if you can check this game out through other means, definitely do it. It's worth a playthrough for sure.
Those carried from the City of Moons shall have their sins washed in the sacred spring. Every 4 years the tower gate opens, and the blessed ones guide the others to the City of Moons.
Are you interested in that book?
Yes.
I too have my mind on the City of Moons. Take anything in the room that will help you in your quest. Goodbye.
Moving along, here's another rare snag for the Nintendo 64 this time. It's called PGA European Tour. Yikes, this is another one of those rare and expensive titles that's actually no good. It always makes it frustrating as a collector. If you saw the latest review of Nintendo 64 market trends, I didn't include this one, namely because of course I didn't own it yet, but it's worth calling out that this title jumped 225% since the start of COVID, and clearly I did a poor job on timing for this grab, so if nothing else, learn from my mistake. Okay, onto the game. This is your most basic game of golf, and outside of some updated graphics, there's not much to be added here in terms of golf games from previous hardware generations. There's not even music. There's just not even generic elevator music, only simple nature sounds like birds chirping the entire time. The controls feel good in some cases like putting, albeit unique from the way most golf games work, but driving seems to be mystifying to me, as it just seems to ignore my button presses for stopping the power meter, both at the top and the bottom of that meter.
Well, what was the thinking behind that?
I found it was mostly consistently happening if the bar went beyond the line, unlike some of the other golf games, so I found myself just stopping it early on purpose to my accuracy's detriment. You play as a generic golfer named Golfer 1, which is pretty lame, and I couldn't find any means to change my name or pick from a preset of golfers. The game modes are also bare and features basically a quick play, which is just you, or a tour where you get to play against another golfer in a series of games. One nice feature is that you can get a flyover of the hole that you're on to plan your path. It takes a bit longer, but it's nice all the same. Overall, it's disappointing that it's just so expensive and it fails to deliver even a decent game, as I couldn't even recommend this over, Mario Golf on the same system. Let's move on.
Has landed in the rough.
Can you do it, Dodgers?
Indubitably, because no one knows his way around space like Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century!
Keeping with the Nintendo 64, here's Looney Tunes Duck Dodgers starring Daffy Duck. Ugh, what a mouthful. This is a third-person action platformer where you play as Daffy Duck's alter ego, Duck Dodgers, as you explore planets attempting to derail Marvin the Martian's plans. Of course, you do this by exploring and collecting atoms in various stages, which are all linked by a planet's hub. The graphics are decent and the stage design is generally good and fun to explore.
Devilishly clever.
While it falls a bit short of, let's say, Banjo and Kazooie, which has a similar vibe of 3D exploration, the focus here again is on collecting, and it also works here as well. The control of Duck Dodgers is pretty tight, and I enjoy the double jump mechanic as it can make for some interesting platforming. There's plenty of fun Looney Tunes humor scattered around the game, and you'll meet a few of the other characters from the show as well. Planets end with a boss, and it's a nice mix-up to the pace of just collecting things. They're not overly hard, as there's plenty of health refills to pick up in the boss areas, as is the case with the rest of the levels too. If you do die though, however, the game is pretty generous with where you get to restart, so the overall game felt a bit too easy.
Get rid of that duck!
Hunting for atoms is fun to do, and they're usually hitting a sweet spot of puzzle solving and platforming to keep it engaging for the duration of the levels. There's some exceptions where they can be hidden in common containers like boxes or vases, and it kind of feels a bit cheap as you're now forced to basically check everything to see if you've missed one and to avoid backtracking in case there is. With decent graphics, good voice acting, and some cool boss fights, this one might be something that's been overlooked by a few, but it's worth a play for sure, especially if you like these collecting platformer type of games.
Whoop! Had the silly thing in reverse.
Here's Snowboard Kids 2 for the Nintendo 64. This snowboard racing game is a great add to the 64's library, and it really fits in well. If you've never played either Snowboard Kids games before, they're a mashup of SSX Tricky and Mario Kart, as you'll be doing tricks alongside a kart racing adventure, only of course you're going to be on a snowboard instead of a go-kart. The tricks are easy to pull off by holding the directional input as you jump, which will make your character either spin or do a flip. These tricks earn you money, which you can use to buy new boards back in town. That town is a hub for the game, and it connects you to do things like paint your board, switch your characters, do minigames, and more. The racing itself is pretty straightforward, and it has generally tight controls, though sometimes turning can get interesting depending on which board you have. The stage design is lighthearted and fun, including many stages that don't have any snow at all. Races consist of 3 laps, and at the end of each lap, you'll be lifted back to the top of the stage to continue. This is a cool concept, but it's also a trap. If you get to these lifts at the same time as some of the other racers, it's incredibly easy to lose a ton of time as each fights for their turn to go up first. Like Mario Kart, the levels are scattered with weapon pickups and are split between red ones and blue ones. The red ones are forward-facing attacks that trigger with the Z button, and the blue ones are either traps to lay or either helpful power-ups to you, like a rocket booster for instance, which are set off with the B button. While the difficulty is generally low in terms of racing, the weapon pickups are very plentiful, and it's not uncommon to fall from first to last place on the last lap of the race, and it doesn't give you enough time to recover. Good skill with racing alone won't be enough to secure first place, and you'll need a bit of luck on your side too, which I know means it probably won't be for everyone. After some stages, you'll get a boss fight, which is a really nice mix-up to the formula. Here too is a race, but it's a race to destroy their HP before you get to the end of the lap. I actually enjoyed these a bit more than some of the races, which can get to feel a bit too long. The music is really good, and it matches the overall bright and colorful stages that you'll be racing around. There's some story components before each stage, but if I'm honest, it didn't really pull me in, and it added little to the game, at least for me. Overall, I enjoyed this one quite a bit, even if those constant weapon bombardments can get a bit frustrating on these long stages. It's definitely a unique game, and it's worth checking out, either entry in the series. There's just some of my pickups from the convention. In total, I ended up snagging close to 50 games this year, and I already can't wait to return next time. While I'm fortunate enough to have some really amazing local retro game stores in my area, these conventions are something else to experience. What are some of the other conventions for retro gaming that I need to get on my list to check out, or maybe which ones I need to avoid? Either way, let me know down in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching Retro Ranger.